think about leadership, there's this underlying expectation of volume.
Right. Yeah. Like whoever is loudest is leading.
Exactly. We picture a megaphone. You stand at the front of the room, you hold the microphone, and your primary job is just to, broadcast your knowledge to all the people sitting in the rows.
It becomes a performance, really. Information just travels down this one-way street.
Yeah.
The leader dispenses the answers, and the followers, well, they just passively absorb them. It's a very predictable dynamic, and frankly, it is incredibly comforting for the ego of whoever is standing at the front.
Oh, for sure. But when you step into the world of transformational small groups,
Yeah,
that megaphone suddenly becomes like actively destructive.
completely.
The entire landscape of leadership just inverts. And that's what we're getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
We've got a really great one today.
We do. Our mission today is all about decoding the hidden mechanics of that leadership inversion. And we're using a fascinating source text as our guide. It's a facilitator guide for a study program called Your Freedom Years: How to Live Life to the Full and Finish Well.
Written by Baha and Margaret Habashi, right?
Yes. Now, the premise of this specific text is to help people navigate their later years, what they call their freedom years, for maximum impact, specifically in a Christian spiritual context.
Right. And it's worth noting early on that while the context is very specifically faith-based, the underlying architecture of how they train their facilitators is entirely universal.
Which is why we're looking at it.
Exactly. I mean, the mechanics of human connection, they just don't change just because the topic does.
Yeah, so whether you are leading a spiritual study or, managing a corporate team
Mhm.
or just trying to foster a deeper conversation with your family, this guide really offers a masterclass in why facilitation has to replace instruction.
It really does. But, before we can even talk about how to run a meeting, we have to figure out who the facilitator actually is in the room.
Right. And the authors use a very specific foundational term for the leader here. They call him the under-shepherd.
Yeah, the under-shepherd.
Yeah.
So, drawing from the Gospel of John, where Jesus is described as the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep, the guide uses this as their ultimate model.
Okay.
So, a facilitator is an under-shepherd entrusted with the temporary care of a small flock. And that subtle shift in vocabulary, it completely changes the psychological posture of the person in charge.
How so?
Well, you are no longer a lecturer tasked with getting through a syllabus.
Mhm.
You are a caretaker, and your job is to create a safe container for human beings.
Wow, okay. That is a massive shift.
Mhm.
And the guide breaks down the internal posture required for this role, too. Reading through their criteria, it feels completely counterintuitive to how we are, typically taught to lead.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, they focus heavily on having a listening heart. They emphasize listening first for facts, which, sure, that's standard. But then they explicitly mandate listening for the emotion and the unspoken need underneath the words.
Because people open up to those who listen well long before they open up to those who speak well.
That's a great point.
Think about the standard leadership impulse when someone shares a struggle. The immediate urge is to, fix it, right?
Yeah, I hear.
To offer advice or to impress the room with some profound insight you have.
Yes, the fixer mentality.
Exactly. But the under-shepherd model demands that you suppress that reflex. You are listening to understand. You are not listening to respond.
I came up with an analogy for this while I was reading.
Right.
Leading a group like this is less like being a professor at a podium and much more like being a host at a dinner party.
Oh, I like that.
You set the table, you curate the guest list, and you make sure the environment is welcoming. But you aren't doing all the eating. You want your guests to enjoy the meal.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
But here's where I have to push back a little on the reality of that role. Because even a dinner party host gets exhausted.
Sure they do.
And the guide insists on the leader having a steadfast, available heart, showing up consistently, doing the emotional labor, preparing every single week. How on earth does a facilitator avoid total burnout when the whole model relies on them constantly absorbing the group's emotional weight?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the guide actually anticipates that exact structural vulnerability. They don't just tell leaders to, try harder or push through it.
Yeah, thank goodness.
Right. They build in functional requirements to prevent collapse. One of their core essentials is that shepherds need shepherding too.
Meaning they need their own support system.
Exactly. They explicitly state, you cannot lead others to wells you have not drunk from yourself.
Which completely reframes self-care. It isn't framed as this luxury or a reward for working hard.
No, it is a functional requirement of the job. I mean, if your nervous system is frantic, the group is going to mirror that anxiety. They won't feel safe enough to be vulnerable. That makes so much sense.
So personal boundaries, deliberate rest, and having your own mentors, or in this context, a prayer team backing you up, those are the structural pillars that actually keep the group stable. You cannot host the dinner party if your own cupboards are completely bare.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we have established that the facilitator is a caretaker and a host, rather than an expert lecturer, that leaves a massive practical void in the room.
A void of instruction, you mean?
Yeah. If the person at the front of the room isn't teaching, how does the actual learning happen?
This brings us to one of the most radical architectural choices in the whole program. They use the flipped classroom model.
Right.
In a traditional setting, the group gathers to hear the material for the first time from a speaker, and then they go home and struggle to figure out how it applies to their lives.
Which usually doesn't work out very well.
No, it doesn't. So the flipped classroom reverses that
Yeah.
entirely. The members do all the heavy lifting before they ever set foot in the room. They're at home reading the book, they're listening to the audio materials, they're working through the self-study guides in private.
Yes. So the meeting itself is purely reserved for interaction.
And to enforce this shift, the guide leans on this brilliant observation from author Mark Golston. He notes that people do not change because of what you say to them, but much more because of what you get them to say.
Which is just so profoundly true. When a participant verbalizes a realization out loud to a group, it cements that concept in their own brain far more effectively than if they had just, passively listened to you explain it to them.
Which leads directly to this metric they call the 15% rule, a concept they borrow from Bible Study Fellowship. The rule dictates that a facilitator should only speak for about 15% of the total discussion time.
Just 15%.
Yes, meaning in a standard 60-minute session, the person theoretically in charge is only allowed to speak for roughly 9 minutes.
9 minutes. It requires immense, almost painful discipline for someone who is accustomed to driving a conversation.
I would struggle so much with that.
A lot of leaders do. Instead of talking, your primary tools have to become reflective phrases, saying things like, "It sounds like you're feeling incredibly overwhelmed by that transition."
Or deploying carefully crafted, open-ended questions.
Yes, questions that actually invite introspection, rather than leading questions where the group is just trying to guess the correct password to make the leader happy.
Right, the classic, guess what I'm thinking, teaching method.
Yeah.
But limiting yourself to 9 minutes means you have to get incredibly comfortable with dead air.
You do. And the guide makes this profound observation about that. They say silence is not a failure of facilitation. It is the sound of people thinking honestly.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it. We are just so conditioned to view silence in a social setting as this awkwardness that must be eradicated immediately.
We really are. But if you ask a genuinely difficult question about someone's purpose in their later years, they shouldn't have an immediate polished answer.
If they do, they're probably giving you a rehearsed platitude.
Exactly. Silence means they are actually doing the internal work right there in the room. Give them the space to do it.
But let me challenge the reality of that restraint for a second. If you only have 9 minutes of talking capital to spend, what happens when the group inevitably goes off the rails?
Oh, the derailment.
Yeah, let's say a massive disagreement erupts over one of the study questions. You can't just lecture everyone back onto the same page with only 9 minutes.
No, you can't. That requires relying on sociology rather than authority.
Interesting.
The guide leans into the established reality that any gathering of humans will naturally move through 4 distinct stages of group dynamics: forming, storming, norming, and performing.
I've heard of those.
Yeah.
So initially a group is in the forming stage.
Yeah.
Everyone is polite, they're guarded, they're just trying to figure out the social hierarchy.
Right. Nobody wants to rock the boat in week 1.
Exactly.
But eventually, as they get comfortable, they hit the storming phase. Friction occurs. Differing personalities clash, or maybe someone expresses a strong, controversial opinion.
And this is usually where inexperienced leaders panic.
Oh, completely. They view the storm as a threat to the group's survival, so they use their authority to just shut the conversation down and force this artificial harmony.
But forcing harmony just sends the conflict underground. It doesn't resolve it.
Precisely. So in the under-shepherd model, the facilitator's job during the storming phase isn't to declare a winner or silence the room. Their job is to guide the process of the disagreement.
You remind the room that differing perspectives, when held with grace, are actually a sign of trust.
Yes. And if a group can survive the storming phase because the leader maintained a safe container, they naturally transition into norming, where they find a healthy rhythm.
And finally, performing, where the deepest, most transformative vulnerability actually happens.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. To survive that storming phase, to only talk 15% of the time without the entire meeting devolving into pure chaos, you need an ironclad structure.
You really do. You cannot just throw a group of people into a room, refuse to speak for 51 minutes, and hope for the best.
No, that sounds like a nightmare.
The vulnerability we're talking about doesn't happen by accident. It is actively manufactured by the architecture of the meeting itself.
Right, and the guide provides a highly rigid, predictable 5-part skeleton for every single 60-minute session. The emotional arc of this hour is just brilliantly engineered.
It really is. It doesn't start heavy, which is key.
Right, the first few minutes, part 1, is dedicated to a check-in and an opening prayer. But the check-in prompt isn't just vague small talk like, hey, how was your
Oh
weekend?
no, the facilitator specifically asks, on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you really doing? Physically, emotionally, spiritually?
It immediately establishes that the superficial social scripts of the outside world have been left at the door. We are being real in here.
And the instructions for the opening prayer are incredibly specific too. They say keep it brief.
Yeah, the guide explicitly warns facilitators not to try and pray for every single issue that was just brought up in that check-in.
Which makes so much sense. If someone just dumped a level 5 crisis on the group during the check-in, trying to resolve it in a 2-minute opening prayer would feel incredibly dismissive.
Absolutely. The opening prayer is just a threshold to cross. It's acknowledging the transition into a sacred space, not solving the problems yet.
Right. Then following that, we have part 2, which is an optional window for a brief chapter overview video.
And this serves as a graceful on-ramp for the discussion.
Right.
Especially useful for catching up anyone who might have, struggled to finish the reading that week.
Yes, but there's a crucial logistical note the guide emphasizes here. You have to cue the technology before anyone arrives.
Oh, the tech fumbles.
It is the worst. Fumbling with screensavers and audio settings, it just shatters the carefully constructed atmosphere of trust you just spent the first 10 minutes building.
So true. Once the tech is out of the way, the core of the hour then shifts into part 3, group sharing. This is where participants bring in the heavy lifting they did at home.
Specifically, sharing their responses to what the study calls the Jesus questions from their private work.
And the facilitator is merely a traffic cop here, just ensuring everyone gets space to speak.
Now, if the room is painfully quiet, especially in those early forming weeks, the leader is allowed to share something briefly and vulnerably to break the ice.
This doesn't prime the pump.
Right, but they must only open the door to vulnerability. They absolutely must not monopolize the room with their own story.
Then the meeting pivots into part 4, the application phase. And I love the restraint the authors demand here.
It's very intentional.
Instead of forcing the group to rush through all 10 questions in the study guide just to prove they finished the homework, the facilitator selects only 2 or 3 questions to explore deeply.
It is a complete prioritization of depth over breadth. You want questions that move the theoretical insights the group just discussed into actual, tangible behavioral change.
Which culminates in the this week commitment. This is brilliant. Every member has to verbalize a specific, actionable goal they are committing to for the upcoming week.
It's very powerful.
Think about why a fitness tracker works. It isn't just recording your heart rate. The psychological act of knowing the device is tracking your progress changes your behavior in real time.
That's a great comparison.
By stating your commitment out loud in this group, you are turning the other members into a social fitness tracker. You know they're going to ask you about it next Tuesday, which creates this undeniable accountability loop.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the final phase of the hour part 5, the closing prayer, reveals the hidden genius of the entire session's design.
How so?
Well, by separating the opening and closing prayers, the group undergoes a complete psychological transition. Think about it. They arrive carrying the stress of traffic, the workday, their personal anxieties.
It's the baggage of the opening check-in.
Exactly. But by the end of the hour, they aren't just carrying their own bags anymore.
Oh, wow.
After 45 minutes of vulnerable sharing, listening to each other's this week commitments, and exploring deep application questions, the closing prayer becomes a space for specific personal intercession.
They are now actively carrying each other's burdens.
Yes. The structure itself took a room of isolated individuals and manufactured a community.
That is just brilliant architecture. So, What does this all mean when we expand the timeline? I mean, it's easy to see how that engineered vulnerability works in a single 60-minute vacuum.
Right.
But keeping that momentum going for an entire program requires a different kind of architecture. The Freedom Year study spans multiple weeks, tackling major themes like finding your pathway to purpose and, how to finish your later years well.
To sustain that level of depth, the journey actually has to begin before the official curriculum even starts. The authors mandate a dedicated kickoff session that serves as the foundation for everything that follows.
The kickoff starts by lowering the temperature with a really low-stakes icebreaker, right? They ask, if you could live anywhere in the world for 1 year during your freedom years, where would it be and why?
Which is great because it gets everyone's voice into the room without demanding immediate, terrifying vulnerability.
Just getting them used to talking.
Exactly. But then they pivot to something incredibly serious, signing a group member agreement.
And this is not just a list of terms and conditions.
No, it is a social contract. They are putting safety, confidentiality, and mutual respect down on paper. Establishing that covenant up front is the only thing that makes the deep vulnerability of week 4 or 5 possible.
Because without a guarantee of confidentiality, nobody's going to share their genuine fears about aging or their regrets.
Absolutely not. Now, during that kickoff, participants are also asked to write down a highly personal, specific prayer detailing exactly what they are asking God to do in their lives through the course of this study.
And that piece of paper gets tucked away, but it becomes the emotional centerpiece of the very last meeting.
Right. The final session abandons the standard study format entirely. It is dedicated purely to celebration and review. The facilitator asks the group to pull out that prayer from day one and really reflect on it.
They examine if it was answered fully, partially, or perhaps in a complete unexpected way. It forces the group to look backward and actually measure the transformation that occurred.
It provides definitive closure to the journey.
It does.
And this raises an important question about the ultimate purpose of this kind of deep communal learning. The goal of the Freedom Year study is not merely self-improvement.
No, it is not designed to create a cozy, insulated little club of people who just feel better about their retirement.
It is not a cul-de-sac where the knowledge just stops.
Right. The entire program ends with a commissioning prayer and a very specific multiplier question. They ask, is there someone in your life you want to share this resource with?
The true end goal is outward impact. The authors want to turn the participants into new leaders. They want the sheep to become under-shepherds themselves, taking this exact framework and replicating it in their own spheres of influence.
It is a self-replicating model of leadership, and the only reason it can replicate so effectively is because of the 15% rule.
Yes, think about it. If the facilitator had been a charismatic superstar who talked for 55 minutes, giving brilliant lectures every week.
The participants would leave thinking, wow, that was amazing, but I could never do that.
Exactly. The humility of the facilitator is exactly what makes the program scalable.
Because the leader only spoke for a few minutes, listened deeply, and relied on a clear structural skeleton to hold the room together, every single person sitting in that circle realizes that they are capable of hosting a group themselves.
By getting your own ego out of the way, you empower the next generation of leaders to step up.
To wrap this all up, effective facilitation is really about creating a safe, structured container. It is about asking great, open-ended questions, listening for the emotion behind the words, and trusting the process enough to simply step back and let the group do the work.
It requires replacing the ego of the expert with the deep empathy of the host.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative challenge for you, the listener. We have been examining these mechanics through the lens of a specific faith-based guide for the later years of life. But human dynamics do not change.
They really don't.
If the flipped classroom and the 15% rule work so beautifully to build trust, navigate friction, and drive real behavioral change in this context, how might your life change if you applied this exact framework to your secular environments?
I mean, imagine applying the 15% rule to your next family dinner. What if you asked one genuinely thoughtful question and then forced yourself to just let everyone else talk?
Or what if you brought this into your next corporate meeting? Instead of standing at the front with your metaphorical megaphone, broadcasting your agenda and trying to prove your expertise, what if you functioned as an under-shepherd for your team?
What if you curated the environment, listened for the unspoken anxieties, and allowed the group to wrestle with the solutions?
Even in a one-on-one conversation with a friend who is struggling, what would happen if you actively resisted that powerful urge to fix their problem or offer advice?
It's harder than it sounds.
It is. What would happen if you dared to stay silent for 85% of your next important conversation? Would the relationship fall apart, or would you finally hear what the people around you are really thinking?
It is a massive risk to your ego.
But trading the megaphone for the dinner table might just be the most powerful leadership decision you ever make. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep listening, and we will catch you next time.